When creating a new building, concrete, bricks, and steel are usually the materials of choice. However, in the last few years, there's been a greater emphasis on making things more sustainable, and this has led to a massive rise in wooden buildings. Today, we're going to be looking at some of the biggest and the most innovative wooden structures in the world. Let's start with number 15, Mjolnir. In recent years, the idea of a wooden, sustainable skyscraper has begun to pick up steam. One of the most famous is Mjolnir, located in Norway. It's considered to be one of the tallest timber skyscrapers in the world. It's almost entirely made out of laminated timber, and it comes in at an impressive 18 stories, and it's 85 meters in height. That gives the building a natural look, and it certainly stands out amongst the trees and the lake that make up its landscape. Number 14, Narvik Community Church. Alright, we're staying in Norway. The Church of Norway is the country's most popular religion, and in the Diocese of Bjørgvin is one of the most impressive churches. It was completed in 2014. It's an all-wood church that makes use of sharp lines that both distinguish the church from its surroundings and show some of the influences of modern Scandinavian architecture. Best of all, with 2 floors to facilitate different types of programming and a total seat capacity of 500, this beautiful structure also has a very practical use for the community it serves. Number 13, the Superior Dome. Most domes make use of synthetic materials, but Superior Dome in the state of Michigan is a little bit different than most. Home of the Northwest Michigan University Wildcats, it's considered to be the largest wooden dome on the planet. The beating heart of the community, it hosts a lot of sports and social events on what's considered to be the world's largest retractable artificial turf carpet. To top this off, it even has hosted George Bush during his 2004 presidential campaign rally, making it a point of interest for sports fans and politicos alike. Number 12, Office Off. So while most workers spend their days in a cubicle, Office Off is a bit different than most. Made of wood, it's meant to blur the lines between a living and a working space. It's filled with strange, sharp angles and oddly shaped windows. It offers office amenities such as integrated meeting points, common areas, a gym, a swimming pool, and a climbing wall. It also houses all the amenities of a house in both cubes and cracks throughout the structure, with these including wardrobes, sleeping spaces, and shelves. When you further consider the fact that it's eco-friendly and as energy as independent as possible, it becomes clear that the Office Off is a great model for other homes to follow. Number 11, Ascent MK. Located in Milwaukee, Ascent MK currently holds the record for being the tallest timber skyscraper on the planet. Coming in at just shy of 87 meters tall, the 25-story tower opened its doors to residents in 2022, and it was built with the help of the Forest Service Wood Innovation Grant Program. While the first 6 floors consist of shops and amenities, the top 19 are all residences, and they stand apart due to their cool wood and glass aesthetic. And while there are new projects that may soon overshadow the Ascent MKE in terms of size and scale, I'd say that it laid a great example for future builders to follow. Number 10, C6. One of the most famous examples of a wooden skyscraper that's still in development is C6. It's located in Perth, Australia. This 50-story residential high-rise aims to turn timber from just 580 trees into half of the 190-meter-tall tower building materials. Now, the idea is that all of this timber will come from sustainably managed forests, and it's believed that it will use around 45% less concrete than a traditional building of a similar scale. The hope is this will translate into the project not only being carbon neutral at completion, but also potentially being a net carbon negative over the course of the building's life. In fact, building developers Fraser and Partners asserts that C6 will be capable of sequestering nearly 23 million pounds of carbon thanks to its sustainability efforts. Those efforts include powering the building on a 100% renewable energy network, giving residents access to a fleet of 80 shareable and chargeable Tesla Model 3s, and having a rooftop fit with 5,300 square feet of edible and floral gardens. Once all is said and done, C6 will come in at more than double the height of the world's tallest wooden skyscraper, which is the Ascent building in Wisconsin. However, according to Fraser and Partners, their goal isn't to set records. Rather, it's to challenge the industry to make future products better. In any case, it's worth noting that there's no timeline for completion, and it will likely be a while before C6 is up and running. However, once completed, it will easily be one of the coolest wooden structures on the planet. Number 9. Hyuji. Wood is a material that doesn't tend to stand the test of time. However, Horyuji seems to be an exception to this rule. That's because while it has its fair share of repairs, it stood for a grand total of nearly 1,400 years. Considered to be the oldest wooden structure in the world, the Hyuji Temple is located in Japan's Ikaruga City. It's constructed sometime between 552 and 710 AD. Its central area consists of a main hall and a 5-story pagoda. The pagoda is the oldest structure at the complex, as the wood reportedly came from a tree cut down in the year 594 AD. Now, this still leaves us with one important question. Why has it stuck around for so long while many other wooden structures have fallen? Well, the answer seems to lie in its craftsmanship. You see, the architects involved had the foresight to use hinoki, it's also known as cypress wood, during its construction. This wood is known for its resilience and its durability, and some experts even say that this has allowed it to remain as strong as it is today when it was first built. It's also worth noting that it continues to be culturally relevant. Officially founded in about 607 AD by a certain Prince Shotoku, as a dedicated and devout Buddhist, he made Horyuji central to the spread of his faith throughout the world. Even today, Horyuji is still a stronghold of the Shotoku sect of Buddhism, ensuring that both secular and religious visitors come far and wide to give it a look. The cultural heritage continues to be very visible, as the site's home to about 2,300 pieces of very early Buddhist sculptures, relics, and art, with these including some of Japan's oldest statues of Buddha. In the years since, the temple's 45 buildings were listed as national treasures of Japan and are so culturally significant in general that the entire complex was registered as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1993. Given the fact that it's an easy day trip from the city of Nara, I say it's worth a visit on your next trip to Japan. Number 8. The Metropole Parasol. The Metropole Parasol has always been a bit controversial. After all, when Jürgen Meyer-Hermann announced his design idea for the structure, there was a near uprising from locals in Sevilla. After all, the plan was to erect this massive wooden structure right in the middle of the old quarter of the city. Amidst beautiful and historic buildings, a giant modern mushroom not only seemed out of place, but to many locals an insult. Yet with time, citizens and visitors began to embrace this strange landmark. So for a bit of context, in 1973 an old market building in Sevilla was completely demolished. This left the land completely vacant, and for decades it was kept that way. However, in 1990 plans were made to turn it into an underground parking. Yet this idea had to be quashed after Roman ruins were discovered underground. Now, out of options, the city opened to an international competition to find a way to redevelop the area, and the Parasol was the chosen design. First and foremost, the structure is absolutely massive, coming in at approximately 150 meters long and 26 meters high. It absolutely dominates the space around it. Made entirely out of wood, it's considered by many to be the world's largest wooden structure. Piecing it together required the creation of more than 8,000 timber pieces connected with steel and glue, and the end result is a whimsical, dreamlike complex. Now, the main visible feature of the structure is its 6 parasols, all of which loosely resemble large mushrooms. These were inspired by the vaults of the Cathedral of Seville and the fig trees in the nearby Plaza de Cristo de Burgos. When you walk inside, you can experience 4 levels of enjoyment. The underground level accommodates an antiquarium, where the Roman and Moorish remains discovered on the site are displayed in a museum. The ground level is the marketplace, where goods can be bought and sold. And finally, the second and third levels are 2 stages of panoramic terraces and dining areas that offer beautiful views of the city. Now, while the structure was certainly costly, after all the final price was a whopping $130 million, I'd say that the end result was certainly worthwhile. Moving on to number 7, the Great Buddha Hall. So there's no doubt that Buddhism is one of the most important religions in Japan, as it's the reported religion of nearly 50% of the people living in the country. Yet of all the Buddhist structures in the country, few are as impressive as the Great Buddha Hall. Located in the city of Nara, it's at the center of the Kegon sect of Japanese Buddhism and was constructed between 745 and 752 CE under Emperor Shomu. On a symbolic level, it was a pretty big deal. It marked the adoption of Buddhism as a state religion. However, on a physical level, it was arguably just as important. Built in a bid to intimidate the much-desired Chinese temples of the Tang Dynasty, the Great Buddha Hall was meant to impress. It's once considered to be the world's largest wooden building. It's home to its fair share of cultural treasures. However, none are quite as impressive as the famous Buddha statue within. Located inside the Daibutsu-den, or Great Buddha Hall, the statue is 15 meters tall and it weighs in at a massive 500 tons, and was reportedly worked on by a whopping 350,000 people. Each feature was made with great attention to detail and little attention to expense. After all, features such as the statue's hair made use of 966 individual bronze balls. This did become a problem because the building of the statue nearly bankrupted the city and essentially ended up costing much of the country's total bronze production for the entirety of the 8th century. The silver lining, of course, is that the short-term sacrifices led to the creation of a statue that can now be admired for generations. If you'd like to visit today, it's worth mentioning that the statue isn't the only cool thing on the site. In regards to the outside, the temple is famous for its herd of sika deer. These rather cute animals wander through the grounds, and the ones here are so tame that visitors can go right up to them and feed them. Inside, you see miniature replicas of the temple and the grounds, various Buddhist statues and wooden columns with a hole in the bottom that supposedly bring good luck. And therefore, if you're on a trip through Japan and make it to Nara, this temple shouldn't be missed. Number 6. Tessar Cyrus. While this beautiful ship may have been lost to antiquity, it nevertheless stands apart as being one of the finest ever to sail the Mediterranean. Considered to be the largest boat in human history, it was created by Ptolemy IV of Egypt in the 3rd century BC. Named Tessar Cyrus, it translates to a number 40 in Greek, and by most accounts this refers to the number of rowers on each column of oars that propelled it. Now, the reason why we know a great deal about this ship is thanks to ancient texts that mention it. These include a lost work by Calazinus of Rhodes and surviving works by Antoninus and Plutarch. If they are to be believed, the ship was absolutely massive. It came in at a length of 130 meters, a height of about 24 meters, and was propelled by an army of 4,000 oarsmen and staffed by about 2,000 soldiers. Given the amount of people involved, moving it around was a complex operation. In fact, if that wasn't crazy enough, the ship was fully equipped for battle. In fact, it had several naval battering rams and a catapult on board, giving it the potential to wreak a lot of havoc. Well, as you might imagine, as with something as huge as this, it was pretty impressive. It certainly wasn't practical. As a result, both ancient and modern sources seem to suggest that it never saw battle. Instead, it was simply a showpiece meant to display the wealth and power and grandeur of the Egyptians. Now, it's worth mentioning that some historians have some doubts about the true size of the ship, and this is because something that large would have almost been impossible to move at the time. After all, it would have required impractically long 21-meter oars, and it may have taken a whopping 1 hour to do just a simple U-turn. Well, it would also be impossible for the ship to have double prow structure that's been suggested. This is because the force and pressure of water would separate the two prows due to the great resistance exerted by the huge size of the vessel. However, given the wealth of documents and the wealth of the Egyptians, I'd say that it's certainly plausible that it was just as grand as ancient scholars have made it out to be. Yet the reality is, we'll never know for sure. Number 5. The Forest Green Stadium. If you haven't heard of Forest Green, I can't blame you. After being relegated from the 4th tier of the English football this season, they'll now be plying their trade in the 5th tier, which is now a level so low that not all the teams are even professional clubs. Well, despite this rather bleak designation from a team that just a few years ago was in the 3rd tier, Forest Green certainly has one thing going for them: its stadium. After all, while it's normally top-tier clubs that have the most innovative stadiums, Forest Green Rovers is a notable exception. You see, all the way back in 2016, they announced plans to make a 5,000-seat eco-friendly stadium, spearheaded by team owner and green energy magnate Dale Vince. The idea was to make a 2-field stadium that's completely made out of timber. The current plans show that the soccer fields within the stadium will be organic, free of pesticides, free of fertilizer, and free of chemicals, and the hope is the grass will even be tended to by an electric lawnmower powered by solar energy. There are even plans for a new wetland and a canal, and once all is said and done, the site aims to self-generate over 80% of the energy it uses. And to top all this off, the old stadium that's now being abandoned will be put to good use, as it will be torn down and replaced with high-quality, low-carbon housing. It should be noted, though, that there's been some backlash. After all, many stakeholders are worried that the construction would cause a lot of noise and disruption. In fact, in June of 2018, the District Council rejected the original plans for the stadium amid concerns about noise, traffic, and the impact on the landscape. However, after a modified application was submitted, it was approved in December of 2019. As an interesting side note, there's many English football teams that have a dislike of Forest Green. After all, they not only had a relatively large budget for years thanks to David Vince's bankroll, but they've also done some things that fans have found irksome, namely hosting the world's first ever vegan football match in 2014. Yet for those of you who like a team with a real eco-friendly and progressive bent, Forest Green is certainly an interesting side with an interesting stadium. Number 4. The Uben Bridge. On the surface, Myanmar's Uben Bridge may look like a rickety wooden thoroughfare. In many ways, you'd be right. However, the bridge also has a ton of cool history and accolades. Built out of the remains of a broken-down royal palace, the bridge was constructed between 1849 and 1851. This makes it the oldest teakwood bridge in the world. However, its length of about 1.2 kilometers also makes it the world's longest. Now, while this rather shifty-looking footbridge with no rails may look like it's going to collapse at any moment, it actually has quite a few design features that make it very sturdy. For example, the bridge was built with a curve in the middle to resist the force of wind and water. The main teak posts were hammered 2 meters deep into the lakebed in order to keep them secure, while the top ends were shaped conically in order to ensure rainwater would flow down easily rather than pool at the top. Now naturally, such a cool-looking structure has attracted the attention of tourists, and to date, the bridge is considered to be one of the region's most popular attractions. While photographers come 24/7, the bridge is especially popular with them in the evening, as the colors of the sky contrast well with the structure of the bridge. Unfortunately, one of the side effects of all this attention is the integrity of the bridge. You see, it was never meant to have hordes of people cross it, and this added weight has forced some of the pillars to be replaced with concrete. Nevertheless, the bridge is still a beautiful and popular place to capture the beauty of Myanmar. However, it is worth mentioning though that for at least the time being, I highly suggest against traveling to Myanmar. Ever since a military junta took control of the country in February of 2021, it's been rife with civil unrest, armed conflict, and the arbitrary enforcement of local laws. There's also been some severe injustices against the Rohingya Muslim people who live there, creating a massive humanitarian crisis. So while this wooden bridge is beautiful, I'd suggest holding off on giving it a visit just for the foreseeable future. Number 3. The Vasa. One of the most immense wooden structures on the planet is undoubtedly the Vasa. It was built by Sweden between 1626 and 1628. It was supposed to be the flagship of the country's navy, however, it ended up being way too big for its own good. You see, in order to build this massive ship that was made by King Gustavus Adolphus, with the idea being it would represent Sweden's rise to power and geopolitical affairs, now on the surface, the Vasa is incredibly grand, weighing in at 1,200 tons. She was far larger than virtually all of her contemporaries, with this being accentuated by her length of 69 meters and height of 52 meters. She also was heavily armed, as she not only had 64 distinct guns, but more importantly, had large enough to propel 267 kilograms of shot forward at any one time. However, despite all of her specs, the Vasa would sink almost immediately after embarking on her maiden voyage. You see, at the time of her christening, the king was at war with the Commonwealth of Poland-Lithuania, and he wanted the Vasa to head his fleet of ships making their way to battle. However, this created a rushed completion timeline that caused various safety concerns and design flaws to be overlooked. More specifically, it turned out that the Vasa had very little initial stability. That is to say, it wasn't good at resisting the force of wind and waves against its hull. This was because the distribution of the mass in the hull structure was lopsided, much of the weight being placed too high up on the ship. This in turn made the center of gravity far higher than the center of buoyancy, and as a result, the ship could heel in response to very little force. Well, unfortunately for the Swedes, this healing occurred in rather a spectacular fashion. After traveling just 1,300 meters, the ship promptly sank after being hit with a slight breeze, creating a massive public embarrassment and equating to a huge waste of public funds. However, what's far more fortunate is that the sinking of the ship has led to the creation of a very cool museum. You see, 333 years later in 1961, the ship was recovered from the bottom, and incredibly, it was largely intact. After a thorough restoration effort, she was put on display at the Vasa Museum in Stockholm, and she sits there in this specially made museum to this day. And yeah, that ship is definitely a must-visit on a trip to that city. Number 2. Ark Encounter. Whether you're a Christian or any other religion, it's not hard to be impressed by the massive building known as the Ark Encounter. Located near the edge of the Bible Belt in the U.S. state of Kentucky, Ark Encounter is a Christian theme park. However, the main star of the show is an impressive life-size replica of Noah's Ark. Coming in at 155 meters long, 16 meters high, and 26 meters wide, the ship is massive, and it's composed of 3 decks. The first deck contains models of some of the animals that could have been on the Ark, with this including dinosaurs and so-called biblical unicorns. And the second deck is a live animal exhibit, includes llamas, alpacas, and donkeys, alongside dioramas of Noah's workshop. The third deck contains displays of what might have happened inside and outside the Ark during the flood, and includes artifacts from biblical times. Well, on one hand, the Ark has evidently been welcomed in by the government. After all, the grand structure was built with the help of tax incentives from the city, county, and state. And furthermore, it's undoubtedly attracted religious tourists to the area, who have in turn contributed to the area's economy. On the other hand, the Ark has caused a lot of concern as well. For one, the fact that 3 levels of government help finance a religious theme park has been critiqued for blurring the lines between church and state. Its interpretations of the Bible have also been criticized by fellow Christians. After all, the founders of the Ark are Christian fundamentalists who believe that the Earth was literally created in 7 days and that humans and dinosaurs coexisted. These are beliefs that mainstream Christian sects such as the Catholic and Orthodox churches explicitly reject, and according to many religious scholars, these beliefs are considered to be new, radical, and unfounded. Therefore, the fact that these beliefs are marketed to impressionable young kids through a theme park has caused some concern. To add to this controversy, the Ark also made headlines for forcing new employees to profess Christianity and sign a statement of faith attesting to several beliefs, with these including a belief in young Earth creationism and the belief that homosexuality is sinful. Since the Ark received public funds and incentives, many have argued that this policy should be rescinded. However, those campaigning against the statement were ultimately overruled. Therefore, while this Ark is certainly impressive, it is certainly also controversial. As with anything, there's 2 sides to this debate, so let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Number 1. The Trojan Horse. One of the most famous stories of a massive wooden structure is the tale of the Trojan Horse. While briefly mentioned in the Odyssey, it is explained at length in Virgil's masterpiece, the Aeneid. According to Virgil, the ancient Greeks were behind the decision to launch the Trojan War against the city-state of Troy. Now, according to legend, the war began due to a quarrel between the gods. The story goes that the goddess Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite were invited to a wedding, while Eris, the goddess of discord, was not. Nevertheless, she arrived uninvited and brought a golden apple inscribed, "For the fairest." Well, each of the goddesses claimed to be the fairest and the rightful owner of the apple. In order to settle this matter, they approached the shepherd tending his flock, and unbeknownst to them, this was Paris, Prince of Troy. Each of the goddesses promised the young man a boon in return for his favor, power, wisdom, or love. Paris chose love and awarded the apple to Aphrodite. In return, Aphrodite caused Helen, the queen of Sparta and most beautiful of all women, to fall in love with Paris. This became an issue when Helen left her husband King Menelaus of Sparta for Paris. Paris then proceeded to be recognized by his royal family, brought Helen to Troy, and as a consequence caused Menelaus to spark the Trojan War. In his stead, Menelaus sent his brother Agamemnon. The troops then besieged the city for a total of 10 years. Throughout that time, there were several isolated battles, with many ending in disaster. After all, the Achaeans lost their heroes Achilles and Ajax, while the Trojans lost Hector and Paris. Finally, tired of the continued siege, Odysseus came up with a plan. Guided by Athena, god of wisdom, he and his men were to make a giant wooden horse with the inscription, "The Greeks dedicate this thank offering to Athena for their return home." They then destroyed their camp and sailed back to Greece. However, the wooden horse they left behind wasn't empty. Rather, it was filled with Greek soldiers. So when the Trojans saw the camp was gone and the horse was left, they fell for the ruse, believing that the Greeks had simply ended the siege. They then brought the horse back into the city and tried to decide what to do with it. Some thought they ought to hurl it down from the rocks, and others thought they should burn it, and others said they were obligated to dedicate it to Athena. In the interim, prophet Cassandra tried to warn the Trojans that the horse would lead to their downfall. However, this was not believed, and the decision was made to keep the horse in the city and decide what to do the next day. This ended up being the fatal mistake. That night, after the soldiers had celebrated and drunkenly fallen asleep, the Achaeans jumped out of the horse and ended the lives of the sleeping population, saving only some of the women and children to keep as slaves. While of course all of the mythology is almost certainly false, this begs the question, was at least some of the story real? On one hand, it is almost certain that Troy itself existed. The discovery of Troy was pretty crazy. After all, the discovery was led by an amateur archaeologist named Henrik Schliemann. However, the existence of the Trojan Horse is less clear. Surely, if it did exist, it would have been an incredible structure. Yet, due to it being built out of wood, it would have almost certainly rotted away by now. Yet the reality is that due to the war allegedly occurring thousands of years ago, it's hard to prove or disprove its existence with any form of certainty. On the other hand, despite all the details, we still don't know how many soldiers were allegedly in the horse. We also don't know if the Trojan War happened at all, and if it did, it likely didn't last for 10 years. It's also worth noting that there's a second interesting interpretation of what happened. You see, in Greek myth, Poseidon has supposedly built the walls of Troy, but then was refused payment for his labor. He then swore revenge upon the city, and years later used his own horses to cause an earthquake that brought Troy's walls down. It's possible that Poseidon's horses became the Trojan Horse, thus putting the Trojan Horse story in motion. But the reality is, given how long ago this happened, nobody knows for sure whether the Trojan War and its famous Trojan Horse were indeed real. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time. Thank you to our channel members.